Legend of the Ghost. Right at the entrance of the village today, people suddenly discovered a charred corpse whose face was unclear. The corpse was about 1.5 meters tall, with a slender body and a few strands of long, slightly curly hair. People had to look very closely to somewhat guess that this charred person was probably a woman, and a very young woman at that. The villagers crowded around the place. They did not know why the body was there, and why the woman's body was burned so brutally. Ghost story. Hearing the news from the villagers, Mr. Dong, the village chief in charge of public affairs, quickly appeared. His face was red and he was breathing heavily. He must have just had a drunken night before he was here. Everyone get out of the way, let someone with authority like me handle this. Mr. Dong shouted loudly, staggering as he walked, about to fall to the ground. As soon as they saw Mr. Dong's face appear, the villagers immediately gathered around him to tell their stories. Someone reported speaking so enthusiastically that he even spat everywhere. This morning, I just led the buffalo from home to the field, and saw its body lying here. Poor thing burned to death. I wonder what cruel and savage army could have done such a brutal thing. A man was holding a rope pulling the buffalo, leaning on one hand, pointing at the corpse and saying, "Last night I saw a fire burning here. I thought someone was burning straw. Turns out they were burning people, not straw." A sour woman also joined in the story. Looking at this person's figure, he must be from another village, not ours. Because in our village, no one would dare go to the fields at night like this. Mr. Dong shook his head several times to sober up, then suddenly shouted, "Everyone shut up, you're just talking nonsense that has nothing to do with the problem." Having said that, Mr. Dong looked around frantically as if searching for someone, then suddenly shook his shoulders, laughed excitedly, pointed in one direction and called out loudly, "Here's Quan, you block off this place for me. I'll go report to the commune later, hurry up or else the villagers will herd the buffaloes and ruin the scene." A man walked out from the crowd, in the direction that Mr. Dong had just pointed. It was a young man about 22 years old, with a broad back and tall figure, and a large, imposing figure. This man's name was Quan, a militiaman of Vu Thon. Quan had dropped out of school when he was young, so he had no education, and only worked as a hired hand sweeping plaster all over the village. When he had the opportunity to recruit militiamen, Mr. Dong saw that Quan was strong and healthy, so he immediately recruited him into the village militia because Quan was both stubborn and easy to command. Hearing Mr. Dong calling him, Quan, who was squatting in a corner observing the corpse, had to stand up and walk slowly towards him, his head slightly tilted as if he didn't understand. Mr. Dong saw that Quan seemed not to understand, so he repeated, "You block off the scene for me, take some ropes and tie them to 4 wooden stakes and fix the 4 corners to prevent people from leading the buffaloes through. Then disperse the crowd." The soldier shouted loudly, "Yes, Uncle Dong, I'm going to work right away." Mr. Dong was a little startled by Quan's action. He rolled his eyes and glanced at him. Then he looked at the villagers and said, "Okay, now everyone go home. Whoever goes to the field, remember to lead the buffalo around here, understand? If you destroy the crime scene, I will call the militia to take you to the commune and lock you up for a few days or half a month. It's not a joke. The crime of destroying the crime scene must be considered an accomplice of the criminals." Having said that, Mr. Dong walked with his legs crossed and nodded unsteadily as he rushed towards the place where the bicycle was parked near the longan tree. Because he had just seen a lot of people gathered around the corpse, he temporarily put the bicycle against the tree trunk to quickly check it out in time. Mr. Dong climbed on his bicycle and rode away at the end of the village path. Waiting for Mr. Dong to leave, Quan also worked hard to bury some wooden stakes in the ground, then started to stretch ropes around to demand protection of the scene. Mr. Dong returned at noon. This time he brought along a group of people from Song Hoa commune, including the chairman, vice chairman, secretary, and even the commune police chief, to investigate. Hearing that someone in the commune had died, the district also sent district police down to investigate, but they did not arrive until the afternoon. During that time, the district ordered the commune to protect the scene and collect information so that when the person in charge came down, they could report. Mr. Dong was very excited, running around the village asking questions, because if he could find out any information, he might make a great achievement. The whole village of Vuthan was in chaos. Some people whispered to each other. This corpse is exactly like the corpse that died a year ago during Tet, also burned black all over. But that incident happened in Duongthon, not in Vuthan. I heard from Duongthon that a few months ago, there were also a few people who died like that for unknown reasons. Now the incident has spread from there to here. Others said. I heard that every time someone is about to burn to death, the whole village over there can smell a burning smell, and it's very burning, like the smell of burning plastic but not as bad. Another person nodded and said. My village has a custom that forbids anyone from going out at night, because nighttime is the time when insects come to catch people. In the past, our village had many deaths like that, so people were very taboo about it, so this person who died in the fire could not be from our village. The villagers were chattering excitedly, and in the afternoon, the district sent down an investigation team of 3 people. One was Police Lieutenant Tran Chi Qian, one was Lieutenant Din Xian Deng, and another woman, also quite young and pretty, wearing a police uniform, was Lieutenant Hong Kyo Nu. 3 people were sent by the Criminal Police Department of Hung Ha District Police to take the lead in the investigation. If they could not find any clues, they would have to invite the Taibin Provincial Police and the Central Police, which was not a small matter. In recent years, Duong Village has had many cases of charred bodies without people finding the reason. Now the incident has spread to Vu Village right next door, making the people of Tsong Hoa Commune even more confused. Some families even left the village because of this incident and ran to the highlands to make a living and never returned. Hearing that the district sent 3 policemen back, Mr. Dong was very happy, ran out to welcome them at the village entrance and shook hands and congratulated them. Hien got out of the car first, leading the other 2 to immediately go to the scene to investigate. Deng drove around to the side while Kyo Nu carried a briefcase under her arm and was holding a notebook to record the incident. Mr. Dong had the opportunity to happily smile, clinging to Qian's back and telling. I have gathered information from all over the village after hearing that you 3 came to investigate. No one in this village has gone missing, so this charred body must be from another village, not from my village. Listening to Mr. Dong's explanation, Qian frowned slightly, thinking about something. He crawled into the scene, put on rubber gloves, and began to examine the body carefully. This body was that of a woman, and from some of the things on her body, it could be guessed that she was about 22 or 23 years old. She wore high heels and half of them were burned black, and on her face was a pair of glasses that were also almost completely burned. Based on the preliminary identification, this woman was most likely knocked down in the back of the neck, and then the murderer started to burn her. Not only that, but they burned her alive, not cremated her after she died. Kyo Nu stood to one side taking notes at the scene, then suddenly walked closer to Qian, leaned close to his ear and asked. This case is exactly the same as the 3 previous cases in Duongthon, the details have not changed. The strange thing here is that Duongthon has had people missing before, but this time the incident happened in Vuthan but it was not someone from the village. Qian also nodded and said. Yes, all the bodies are related to the murderer's method of killing. This guy is most likely a fanatic. This DT-26 project was established 3 months ago, but there are still no clues to find the murderer. Deng had just gotten out of the car, he glanced at the body then looked at Qian and said. The difficult problem here is that the victims seem to have no conflicts with anyone. And this murderer seemed to do it just as a beastly hobby of his. Qian shook his head and said. If it's just a hobby, then it's not really, because the girls he chooses are all very young, and they all have a common standard height of about 1.50 meters. Kyo Nu suddenly thought of something, she suddenly said. Or maybe the murderer wanted to kill her in Duong Village, but because things went beyond his plan, the victim was brought here. Then, because he was afraid of being exposed, he didn't hold back at all and killed the victim right here? Qian nodded. Your guess is correct, it's very possible. Our superiors ordered us to report back within 7 days at the latest. I think we should stay here for a while to investigate the matter so we can make it in time. Keonu also nodded in agreement. That's right, lying low is the best option. Furthermore, I think to avoid the culprit's suspicion, we lie low right here in Bhutan, not in Duong Phan. If we lie low here, the culprit in Duong Phan won't know. The incident of the fish that escaped his net and spread to Bhutan could very well be just his mistake. Dung asked again. What about this body? Kian pondered for a moment before answering. First, we will take the victim's body to the forensic department to verify his identity. At the same time, we will send someone secretly to Duong Phan to check if anyone is missing, to avoid exposing our undercover operation. Hearing Kian's arrangement, the other two agreed to follow. After that, all three people left the scene and took the body to the Tai Bin Provincial Police Department. 2 days later, all three of them returned secretly and in plain clothes. They disguised themselves as 3 vendors who dumped a cart of oranges at the entrance of the village, then asked to rent a deserted house in the village for convenience. Unfortunately for them, they could not rent the house because the owner was seriously ill and his family would not receive them. Finally, reluctantly, Mr. Dong was summoned by Kian's men to the village cultural house at dusk that night to discuss. Seeing Kian and his men, Mr. Dong was initially a bit suspicious because he had only met them once before, and only briefly before they left. This time, Kian's men were only wearing plain clothes, and they stood at the entrance of the village's cultural house without introducing themselves, so Mr. Dong thought he had met strangers. It was not until Kian pulled him back and whispered in his ear the secret order from his superiors that he realized. Oh. So you're the district police officer? I didn't recognize you. Kian put his index finger in front of his mouth and said softly. Keep your voice down. The whole thing will be exposed now. We need you to arrange a temporary resting place in the village to investigate undercover. It has to be very secret, you know? Mr. Dong was a bit stunned, then suddenly seemed to understand. He hurriedly and excitedly said. That's not difficult, you guys can come stay at my house for a few days. Come on, hurry up or it'll get dark. Mr. Dong finished speaking and turned around, pulling Kian's hand to follow him. Then Kian immediately held his hand and said. We can't follow you for now, we still have to investigate tonight. At around 10 o'clock at night, come back here to pick us up and take us to your house to rest. Mr. Dong heard that and immediately disagreed. He panicked and waved his hand saying. No. The people in this village have a rule that they cannot go out after dark for fear of being caught by insects. You should do the same, come with me to my house to rest, then tomorrow morning we can go investigate early. Hearing Mr. Dong say that, Dung licked his lips and asked curiously. Worms? What are worms that your villagers are so afraid of? Kian also nodded in disbelief and said. This is a murder case, no joke, don't talk nonsense with us. Mr. Dong jumped up and said. I'm telling the truth, I'm not joking. This village has a legend about that breed. And my family's experience over the years has never been wrong. Keonu was also very interested in this, she immediately said. Then tell us everything. The more details the better. Mr. Dong looked around for a while and then said. Okay, I'll tell you. But it's almost evening, almost the taboo hour of the village. You guys follow me home, finish your meal, then close the door and sit inside my house and I'll tell you. Seeing Mr. Dong's persistent insistence, Kian's men had no choice but to obey. They followed Mr. Dong to his house. When he arrived home, Mr. Dong's wife, Mrs. Chi, saw her husband bringing 3 very young people home, and they were also talking very politely, so she immediately knew that they were honored guests. Without waiting for her husband's instructions, Mrs. Chi quickly butchered a chicken and prepared a nice meal to entertain the guests. When Mrs. Chi finished cooking and carried the tray upstairs, it was already dark. Mrs. Chi put the chickens in the coop, then closed the gate and the door. Then she told her daughter Lu to stop sowing rice in the yard and quickly go upstairs to lock the door. The whole family gathered around the dinner table, which included many rustic dishes that Mr. Dong's family brought out to treat the 3 people Kian, Keonu, and Dung. At the dinner table, Dung had just finished putting a piece of chicken in his bowl, then put his chopsticks down next to the tray, looked at Mr. Dong impatiently and asked. All right. Now we are all inside the house, as is the custom in the village. Can you tell us about it? Qian and Qiu also stopped picking up food, looked attentively at Mr. Dong and waited for him to explain. Mr. Dong wiped his chopsticks across his mouth several times to wipe off the grease, then exclaimed. I told you, the comrades in the district did not believe it, and thought that we, the people of Vu Thon, were superstitious, but in fact this story is true. This custom was left over from my great-grandfather's time, and until now, no one has dared to violate it. And the person who tried to violate that rule is no longer alive to tell the story. Mr. Dong's daughter Lu, who was sitting next to her father, also nodded and said in agreement. That's right, guys. When I was a kid, I even saw with my own eyes a worm catching a person. Qian was a bit nervous, his voice urgent, and asked. So what is a worm? Can you explain it to us clearly? You keep beating around the bush and we don't understand anything. Mr. Dong smiled, scratched his head and said. Well, let me tell you everything clearly. Lu, go into the room and get some old photos of your grandparents for Dad. Hearing Mr. Dong call, Lu was eating and quickly put down her bowl of rice on the tray, then quickly stood up and ran into the inner room to get out a stack of very old black and white photos, then gave them to him. Mr. Dong took the stack of photos, then took a sip of spicy wine, frowned, and then began to tell the story. This worm has been told since a long time ago, since my grandfather's time, but I still only know that it is a custom that I don't know where it started. I heard that it originated from the karma of the ancestors of the family that opened this land. This person stole a lot of unjust property when he was alive, so when he died, the spirit sent the worm to capture all his descendants, killing them all. If that was all, it wouldn't be worth mentioning, but it is rumored that when this person's descendants died, they mistakenly reported the name of another person, so the worm kept capturing the wrong person, randomly capturing the whole village. In the end, it no longer had any taboos about capturing by name, but it captured everyone in Vu Thon who went out at night. Mrs. Ji also continued her husband's words. That's right, guys, people who are killed by worms are very scary. Their mouths are wide open, and their skin is pale. I have a nephew who also broke the rule of going out at night, but it was only because he drank alcohol. As soon as he got home he died with his teeth showing. Willow also said. After the day he died, the worms still didn't let him go. Every night, my family heard him calling out to open the door. It was the worms that transformed into humans, trying to trick the family into going out so they could catch him too. So scary. Mr. Dong nodded slightly and added. I heard that there are also worms in other regions. They appear when someone dies in a house, and often transform into owls that perch on the fence. Then at night, when people are fast asleep, they imitate the voices of relatives or friends of the house and knock on the door. If people answer, they are dead to them. Mr. Dong told the story while pointing at the stack of photos in his hand to demonstrate. Here, this photo is of my grandmother, also Liu's great-grandmother. That day, Lu saw with her own eyes the worm catching people. Lu, tell us about it. Mr. Dong said and urged Lu to tell the story in detail. Lu took the opportunity to drink a sip of soup and then began to tell clearly. I really saw it, guys. That day, my grandfather insisted on going out to the water jar at the end of the yard. He said he heard my grandfather calling for help, to come out quickly or he would be killed by the worms. And my grandfather was clearly still in the bedroom at that time. But my grandmother, as if possessed by a demon, just rushed out. Oh my, he hadn't gone 10 steps when I saw a flickering fire at the fence. It jumped towards him, then he fell down in the yard, his mouth wide open, his eyes wide open and his skin pale like a drowned person. At that time, my parents were all away, only my grandparents were home. I was still young so I didn't know anything. I just wanted to go out and pull my grandfather in, but my grandparents wouldn't let me. It wasn't until the next morning that someone dared to come out and take my grandfather's body away for a funeral. Listening to Liu's emphatic and resolute affirmation, Qian and the other 3, although they were policemen who had faced many horrifying situations before, still felt a bit scared. A moment later, Deng did not think it was right, he said. Our people often have superstitious coincidences. They say the old lady died, maybe because of a stroke, not because of a coincidence. Keonu also wiped her sweat a little. She calmly considered everything. Let's talk about the details of the case. Why wasn't the victim from this village? It's very possible that he was afraid of this story of a man-catching bug, so he didn't dare to act recklessly in Bhutan. We can take advantage of this incident, use it as a good cover to hide here. Then secretly go to Duong Thon every night to investigate. We will definitely be able to get a clue. Hien nodded in agreement with the two people's actions and said, whether the details of the case are clear or not is the most crucial at this moment. 3 months have passed, and the time of death of the victims has become closer and closer. The second case was a month apart from the first, the third was half a month, and the fourth was a week apart. The time between the cases is divided into halves continuously like a rule. If the calculation is like this, then tonight he will definitely continue to kill people. Keonu nodded and continued. The time the girl died last night, according to the forensic examination, was exactly 9 o'clock in the evening. So tonight, it is very likely that the murderer acted around this time. Deng also said. Then we should finish eating quickly, then we have to go to Duong Thon to investigate immediately or we will be in time. Hearing the three people say that, Mr. Dong panicked and waved his hand in disagreement, saying, you guys absolutely must not do that, what we are telling you is true. It's okay if you don't believe it, but you shouldn't go. If something happens, how will I explain to the district leaders? Hien calmly smiled and reassured Mr. Dong. Someone from the commune government will report this on your behalf. We are police, we cannot be swayed by these superstitious stories. This is a time of crisis, the murderer is about to kill someone. If we cannot stop him, it is as if he deserves to die. Therefore, even if we are being harmed by something like the insect you described, we still have to go. Mr. Dong sighed, knowing that he could not stop the three people's decision, so he only gave a few instructions. There's a reason why the worms catch people. It's okay for the three of you to go out at night, but if you're in this village, don't say a word. Talk. After you leave the village, and if you hear someone calling out to you, don't believe it's real. If you see someone in trouble or injured, don't run over to ask, just ignore them. Hien realized that it was impossible for him to disagree with him, and he had been nagging him all day, so he clicked his tongue and firmly promised him to let it go. Okay. We won't say anything, nor will we help anyone. Don't worry, when we get back later, open the door and let us in. Mr. Dong waved his hand and said. Even if you call me, I won't dare open the door. Here, I'll give you some photos. When you get back, just slip them through the crack and knock on the door. When I see you, I'll open the door for you to come in. Hien reached out to take the photos, then carefully put them in his pocket so they wouldn't fall. After finishing the meal, the three of them began to prepare their weapons to go to Duong Thon to ambush the culprit. The three of them walked out of Mr. Dong's house and immediately walked quickly towards Duong village. Since no one in Vu village dared to go out at night like this, the three of them did not need to hide from anyone while moving, but instead walked freely on the village road. The night road was deserted and quiet, and only the electric lights from a few houses could be seen. There were no street lights. The three of them had to carefully walk close together to avoid getting lost, and they also had to stay quiet, trying not to make any noise. Although they did not believe Mr. Dong's threats, the three of them still tried to leave Vu Thon's territory before starting to whisper and discuss with each other. It's already 8 o'clock in the evening, it's almost time for the murderer to act. At this hour, the people of Duong Thon are still awake. You two guess, where will he choose to strike? Hien sat next to a bush and spoke carefully. Keonu and Deng thought carefully, then said a few words. Every time before, the dead bodies were found on the riverbank dike, so this time it will most likely happen there too. Keonu affirmed that. Hien did not think it was right, he said. I think differently. The way he chose to burn the victim, it was like performing a sacrificial ritual. It is very possible that he belonged to a certain religion in the world, religious, worshipping Satan for example, so that's why he did that. The fact that he killed people according to the rules, it is very possible that he wanted to call the devil up to seek personal benefits. Therefore, he would choose a place that is sheltered from the wind and close to people. The dike is too windy because it is along the river, and cremating the body there would be discovered, so no. Dung frowned and asked. But clearly every time the corpses appear on the dike, if he didn't do it there, then where did he do it? Hien knocked Dung on the head and cursed. You're so stupid, you studied police and you don't know that the murderer can also create a fake crime scene? Dung shook his head and said. It's not that I don't know about it, but there's no way he could have faked the scene when the whole ground was burned. No way. Dung was speaking halfway when he looked scared and did not dare to continue. Hien nodded, continuing to answer Dung's guess. You thought correctly, the murderer burned the victim alive, then forced the victim to move while she was burning fiercely, an extremely brutal act. Keonu swallowed, feeling a bit disgusted by such a method in her throat. But after all, Keonu was also a police officer, so that feeling was quickly suppressed and disappeared without a second thought. 8:45 in the evening, exactly 15 minutes from the time the murderer was due to act. The three of them still had no idea what crime scene the murderer had chosen. In the end, they reluctantly agreed. Although the dike was not the first place to commit the crime, they could still see the culprit. As long as they acted quickly, they could still save the victim from being burned to death, and could also quickly control the culprit and bring him to justice. The plan was quickly agreed upon. The three men hid in an abandoned dike watchtower. Then they carefully waited for the time when the murderer was likely to appear. Just as they had predicted, albeit a minute later. But the culprit had indeed appeared, and what was even more terrifying was that the victim had indeed appeared as well. As Kian had initially deduced, the victim was indeed on fire. A middle-aged man, driving a truck carrying the victim, tied her up and threw her in the back of the truck. And when they reached the middle of the dike, he continued to dump the girl on the ground. After the girl fell to the ground, he carefully used a broom to sweep away every tire mark after the truck had passed by to erase any traces. Bang! Unable to wait any longer, Kian fired the first shot, initiating the hunt for the culprit. Dung seemed to have been waiting for that moment. He was assigned to rush to save the girl. He had prepared a wet cloth. As soon as Kian launched the attack, he rushed forward and covered her body with a wet blanket to put out the fire. Everything happened extremely quickly. Keonu rushed forward, pointing her gun at the man sitting in the truck cabin, forcing him to surrender. But he was a reckless man. Despite Keonu's threats with a gun, he still stepped on the gas and sped away from her. Sight. Boom. 2 more shots were fired by Keonu, but those 2 rounds of bullets only seemed to injure the killer's arm, and were unsuccessful in forcing him to stop the car. Kian approached and tried to jump onto the truck bed, but the perpetrator quickly dumped the truck, causing him to fall back. Angry, Kian cursed loudly. Oh my God! So close and still missed. The truck gradually disappeared at the end of the dike. Dung also successfully put out the fire and saved the burned girl. However, although she did not die, she was still severely burned. Dung helped her up, and while she was still conscious, he quickly got information about the murderer. He asked, "Girl, do you remember his face? Do you know who he is?" The girl whispered, her whole body trembling. "I have." She said those 2 words and then passed out. Dung tried his best to shake her, but she couldn't wake up. Suddenly Kian had to interrupt. "Stop shaking her, Dung. Can't you see she's exhausted? For now, take her to the commune health station. Then tonight we'll take turns guarding her. I'm sure the killer knows she's not dead, so he'll find a way to kill her." Keonu also agreed, she said. "Then let Mr. Dung look after her until about 2 in the morning. We'll go back to Vuthan to rest and take turns keeping watch. By tomorrow morning, there will definitely be an ambulance from the district to take her to the district hospital for treatment." Dung nodded and said, "Okay, then you 2 go back to Vuthan and rest first. I will keep an eye on her." If there is any news, I will call you too. Remember not to turn off your phones. Having said that, Deng carried the girl and ran towards the commune health station. The commune health station was located right at the beginning of Vu Thon and also near Duongfan. It was the border of these two villages. If anything happened, Deng only needed to call and Qian and Qiao Nu would almost certainly be there very quickly to help. Watching Deng's figure disappear, Qian smiled at Qiao Nu and said, "Okay, Deng is gone too. Now we can be more comfortable with each other." Qiao Nu suddenly blushed and said, "When are you going to make public our relationship? You're hiding it from Deng too." Qian pressed his index finger on Qiao Nu's pretty little white nose and flattered, "If you're not afraid, then what am I afraid of? I'm just afraid that the person I love is too beautiful, has many men chasing after her, and will leave me." Qiao Nu turned her head slightly shyly. She walked ahead pretending not to talk to Qian. Qian smiled. He ran to hold Qiao Nu's hand, then both of them walked towards Vu Thon. At that moment, they did not know that the truck that had just escaped had turned back. The man sitting in the truck cabin was smoking, the cigarette butts falling everywhere. He watched the two figures disappear into the night, his eyes strangely cold. When they arrived at Vu Thon, Qiao Nu and Qian still held hands and looked at each other flirtatiously. The two of them walked into the village path, slowly looking up at the stars. In that loving moment, Qiao Nu suddenly saw an old woman fainted on the bank of the pond right next to the village road. Qiao Nu immediately turned to Qian and said, "Mr. Qian, it looks like someone fell." Qian also turned his head to look in the direction Qiao Nu had just pointed. He immediately nodded and said, "Yes, an old lady really fell. Let's go help her." But Qiao Nu suddenly shook Qian's hand and said, "Mr. Dong already told me that if you see someone else in trouble, you must not help, or you will save the same person." Qian suddenly smiled, then gently tapped Qiao Nu's forehead with his finger and said lovingly, "You are a police officer and you dare to talk superstitious like that. Do you believe I will report to my superiors and not promote you in the future?" Qiao Nu slightly curved her lips, showing her crooked teeth in a charming smile. Her tiny eyes looked very beautiful as she replied, "Then stop loving." Qian pretended to be startled, glaring and glancing sideways. "Ah. You dare." Qiao Nu covered her mouth and laughed, then waved her hand. "Okay, no more joking, so are we going to help the old lady or not?" Qian puffed out his chest and affirmed, "Help, why not help?" Then he rolled up his sleeves, hurriedly ran to the old woman, asked her questions, helped her up, and said, "Oh my God, what are you doing here in the middle of the night? Why are you still wandering around the pond? I thought our village was very wary of insects. You fell down here like this. Do your children know?" Qian helped the old lady up and asked like that. Qiao Nu stood far away on the side of the road and saw Qian asking such questions, so she covered her mouth and laughed with delight. Qian saw Qiao Nu standing by the roadside smiling and said, "Whose daughter is that girl? Why don't you help the old lady and just stand there laughing? What a rude person." Qiao Nu was still smiling. She shyly intended to go closer to Qian, to the old lady to help. But after taking 2 steps, the smile on her lips suddenly faded. And Qiao Nu's face suddenly turned to fear. Qian was asking the old lady, suddenly turned to look at Qiao Nu and saw her expression. He was startled and asked, "Qiao Nu, what's wrong?" Qiao Nu stuttered, her mouth spoke intermittently, her hands trembled as she only said, "Mr. Qian, the old lady, she is not human." Qiao Nu finished speaking a few sentences and looked like she was about to faint. Qian laughed, thinking that Qiao Nu was being shy with him again. He said, "Okay, human or not, please come down here and help." Qiao Nu kept her mouth wide open, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Qian suddenly turned his head to look and he was startled. Oh my, the old lady's face had pitch black eyes, her mouth was open, showing long fangs, grinning disgustingly. Qian was so scared that he immediately swung his arm and pushed her to the ground. But strangely, her thin arm kept pressing tightly against his body, making him unable to move. His whole body was stiff, his legs were shaking and he could not move. Bang! At this moment, Keanu fired a shot as if to save the day. Kian's whole body suddenly felt light, the arm that had been on his shoulder had also disappeared. When Kian turned around to look, the old lady was nowhere to be seen. He was so scared that he pulled Keanu's hand and ran towards Mr. Dong's house. When he got there, he quickly pulled the photo out of his breast pocket and intended to put it through the door. Only then did he have a chance to look closely. The person in the photo was the old lady he and Keanu had just met. Kian banged on the door, then quickly stuffed the photo through the door slot and called out loudly, "Mr. Dong, open the door for us quickly." Hearing the loud noise, Mr. Dong was a little startled. But he had been mentally prepared, so he was not too surprised. Very quickly, he discovered the photo stuffed under the door crack. Mr. Dong immediately confirmed that it was exactly Kian's group. So he quickly pushed the latch down and quickly pulled the door to one side. Opening the door, Mr. Dong immediately saw Kian and Keanu's figures appearing behind the door. The two people had disheveled hair as if they had just encountered something, and were breathing heavily in panic. Mr. Dong immediately guessed part of the story. He looked around for a moment at the scene outside and then immediately urged the two people. "You two go inside quickly." Kian nodded, then pulled Keanu's arm to follow him. As soon as the two of them entered the house, Mr. Dong slammed the door shut. At this moment, outside the yard, suddenly appeared a hunchbacked figure walking towards the door. Mr. Dong did not notice that at some point, the photo that Kian had stuffed through the door slot and left on the floor was slowly being pulled back through the door slot and dragged outside and disappeared. Mr. Dong waited for the two of them to sit down and catch their breath before asking, "Did you two just meet a bug? Where is the other comrade? Don't tell me he was taken by a bug." Kian breathed and waved his hand saying, "He's fine. He's on guard at the commune health station. The two of us just came here to rest for a while." But Kian was out of breath halfway through his sentence and had to swallow his saliva, unable to continue. Mr. Dong immediately analyzed. "But on the way back, you two met a bug, right? And then you helped him, right?" Keanu calmed down and regained her composure before answering Mr. Dong. She said, "Yes, we really encountered a ghost. It pretended to be an old lady who fell down on the pond bank. When Kian helped her up, Mr. Dong sighed and shouted, 'See, I knew something was going to happen. You two stay here tonight, don't go anywhere. Tonight the insect will knock on the door, and when it does, it will pretend to be that comrade, so don't open the door.'" Mr. Dong finished speaking, turned around, and tried to pick up the photo on the ground, but he couldn't find it. He turned back and asked Kian and Keanu, "Where is my photo?" Kian looked around blankly and said, "Isn't it under the door?" Mr. Dong shook his head with a slightly panicked look and said, "Of course not, no way." Mr. Dong trembled slightly, but immediately affirmed, "Oh no, it was the insect that took the photo. Now it has followed me all the way here. Tonight this house will not be safe with it. Knock knock." As soon as Mr. Dong finished speaking, there was a loud knock on the door. Mr. Dong trembled and did not dare to move. Kian quickly called out, "Who is that?" Outside immediately there was a response. "I'm Quan, a militiaman of the village. I heard from Uncle Dong that some men from the district were coming down to investigate, so I brought some food over at midnight to eat with you guys for fun." Kian suddenly glared and turned to look at Mr. Dong and said, "Why did I tell you to keep our undercover work a secret?" Mr. Dong scratched his head and said, "Well, Quan is the village militia, the more he knows, the better he can support. I just called to let him know. If he answered like that, then it must not be a coincidence. Let me open the door for him." Mr. Dong opened the door, intending to let Quan in, but unexpectedly, the person standing behind the door was not Quan at all, but the old woman that Kian and Keanu had saved earlier. Mr. Dong opened his eyes wide. Before he could say anything, his face turned pale and he collapsed to the ground. In the night, a terrifying scream rang out, waking up Mr. Dong's whole family. The scream just now was from Keanu because she was so scared when she saw the face of that ghost when it appeared. Trying to suppress his fear, he quickly pulled Mr. Dong's whole body inside and slammed the door shut. Mr. Dong's face was absent-minded, as if he had lost his soul, and he did not say a word. Although he was still breathing, his face was as pale as that of a dead person. A few minutes later, Mr. Dong's breathing gradually became fainter and fainter, then turned to gasping, until he made a few grunting sounds in his throat and then stopped breathing completely. Little Lu saw her father die and could not help but scream, "Dad!" Then he rushed forward and hugged Mr. Dong's body, shaking his dead body and calling him continuously. Mrs. Ji also fell to the ground, screaming like crazy. Qian's eyes kept blurring and fading because he was crying too. Mr. Dong died because of his mistake with Keanu. If only the two of them really believed what Mr. Dong said was true, then perhaps he wouldn't have been captured by that insect pretending to be Quan. The next morning, the news of Mr. Dong being captured by the insect spread throughout Wuthan. The people here were not unfamiliar with this early on because in the village, cases of careless people being captured by the insect and losing their lives were not rare. Supporting Mr. Dong's funeral until the afternoon, Qian and Keanu also went to the commune health station to meet Deng. Deng fell asleep next to the burned girl. She was still alive but her breathing was very weak. By the time Qian and Keanu arrived, the ambulance sent from the district had also arrived. The girl was carried by Qian to the ambulance, then Deng woke up and asked, "Did you see anything strange last night?" Deng just woke up, confused and yawned, saying, "Nothing strange, but why didn't you two come out and change shifts with me yesterday? I was kept up all night and only dared to sleep a little bit until morning." Qian sighed and replied, "Village Chief Dong is dead, Deng." Deng was dreaming when he was suddenly awakened by a bucket of cold water. "What did you say? Mr. Dong is dead?" Deng rubbed his eyes as if he couldn't believe his eyes, and Keanu standing next to Qian also affirmed, "Yes, he's dead. And he died from something we don't believe in, a coincidence." Deng laughed and said, not believing it was real, "You two are joking with me again. Can that joke of old Dong fool me? What a clever storyteller." Qian affirmed, "We are telling the truth, this village really has that kind of insect. Last night, Keanu and I saw it with our own eyes, and as a result, we implicated Mr. Dong and caused his death." Deng was stunned, he thought that these two people were joking with him a bit too much. But looking at the serious expressions of Keanu and Qian, Deng immediately had to believe it was true. Qian asked again, "Did you get any more information while you were watching the girl yesterday?" Deng replied, "A very important piece of information has been revealed. She said that the murderer was not from Duongfan, but from Wuthan." "People from Wuthan?" Qian was a bit thoughtful, then he was a bit startled when he thought of a problem. He analyzed. If the murderer was someone from Wuthan, then the problem would probably be easier to solve. Because he was someone from Wuthan, he often relied on this coincidence to create a cover for himself. Therefore, no matter how many tragic incidents occurred, he was still not discovered. Moreover, he also chose victims from Duongfan to mislead the investigation. Keanu suddenly said, "If he really is from Wu Village, then it will be easy to deal with, because the people of Wu Village all go to bed very early, no one goes out at night. We just need to split up into 3 positions around the village exit, hide deep and guard to search. As long as we see anyone from Wu Village moving towards Yang Village tonight, it will definitely be him." Qian nodded in agreement, but looked embarrassed and said, "Our biggest problem here is not whether we can find him or not. It's about that demonic insect." Deng had never seen a worm before, nor had he ever been afraid of ghosts. Through Qian and Keanu's stories, Deng could not imagine the horror of the worm, so he still said firmly, "What's there to be afraid of when it comes to the worms? Just listen to what Mr. Dong said before. The 3 of us will each hide in a corner. Don't make any noise, and don't pay attention to anyone in distress. Just send a message to alert the other 2 to leave. If we strictly follow these instructions, the worms won't appear." Keonu also agreed with Dung's guess, she said. It's very possible that we accidentally talked in Vuthan's territory last night and lured that insect out. If we're more careful tonight, there probably won't be any problems. Hien sighed. He was very worried that things would turn out as bad as last night. But the deadline to report to his superiors was approaching, and the serial killer was on the move again tonight. If the three of them did not act now, another life would be lost in the murderer's cruel way of burning. Finally, he nodded in agreement with the plan proposed by Dung and Keonu. He said, "Okay, let's agree on the first action. Tonight, the three of us must hide at 3 directions of the village gate, each at 1 gate. The agreement is that while hiding, we must not make any noise, but only carefully observe. Especially when we see someone in distress, we must absolutely not be moved to help, understand?" The other two agreed with Qian's opinion. That night, the 3 people followed the plan and hid close to the bushes at the village gate. Keonu was assigned to hide at the west gate, Dung at the south gate, and Qian to keep watch at the north gate. When the afternoon sunlight faded, the 3 people began to cautiously crawl into the bushes, hiding close together, breathing softly, trying not to make any noise. When it got dark, all the households in the village rushed inside their houses and locked the gates very carefully. Time passed quietly. Each second the clock ticked by while drops of sweat soaked Qian's shoulders. He hoped that his guess would be correct this time. Like last time, the murderer would emerge from the shadows and he could put an end to his series of crimes. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, a dark shadow appeared at the beginning of the village path. Qian was nervous, holding his breath, trying to make the space as quiet as possible. It seemed that in the air at this moment, all one could hear was the chirping of a few damn mosquitoes. From Qian's forehead, sweat gradually poured down and increasingly soaked his shirt. Qian gently and cautiously touched the pistol in the holster on his hip. Then he quietly waited for the dark shadow to gradually approach. At the end of the trail, a dark shadow of a man kept walking with very steady steps without realizing that someone seemed to be watching him. The man just passed by where Qian was hiding. In the dark night, Qian could not see the man's face clearly. Waiting for the guy to go a distance, Qian began to sneak up and follow him closely. The dark shadow of the man kept walking slowly, leisurely with a steady, rhythmic speed like a machine. Qian also had to keep his chasing speed consistent to chase after the man so that he could not be detected, but still be able to follow the man without losing sight. While trying to focus on the culprit, Qian quickly retreated to a corner of the house right next to the village path to hide. His phone vibrated, signaling that a text message had just been sent. Qian was a little surprised, but quickly took out his phone to read the message. "That was Keonu's message," she said. At the west gate, the suspect was spotted heading towards Duongfan. Qian jumped in fear. Since Keonu said that she had discovered a suspect, who was the person Qian had been following all this time? Who was he that he appeared and walked around the village path at night so arrogantly? Qian carefully put the phone back in his pocket, then continued to peek out and look toward the trail leading to the north gate leading out of the village. At that trail, that man still appeared, still walking at a steady pace out of the village. Qian continued to follow him to make sure whether he also intended to go to Duongfan or not. If he really had such an intention, then it was very possible that in this case, there would be multiple perpetrators, a group of criminals, not a single person. If that were the case, it would become a bigger case that 3 people could not handle. If it was one person, then 3 people could use their strength to capture him and bring him to justice. But if it was a group of people, then more people would be needed to assist. Otherwise, if there was just a slight mistake, someone in the group would escape. Qian carefully followed the man, occasionally paying attention to the phone's movements to see if it vibrated with any more messages, because if there were more messages, then Dung's southern gate must have discovered the suspect. But after a long time without any message, Qian was sure that Dung's south gate had no problem. Just as he turned around to continue following the man's body suddenly turned back. Qian was startled and quickly hid behind a bush. He continued to observe the man. He did not continue walking towards the north gate of the village, but suddenly turned around and walked back. Qian was a bit panicked and guessed, Could it be that the man had discovered that someone was following him? He tried his best to carefully hide in the bushes to observe the situation. At this moment, the man's face gradually appeared before Qian's eyes when he turned his head. Qian watched very carefully. The man's figure walked closer and closer to him. Qian held his breath, trying not to make a sound, then walked a certain distance. The man's entire face was clearly visible in the dim light. Qian opened his mouth, wanting to scream. But luckily he managed to control his emotions. The man that he had been following all this time unexpectedly was Mr. Dong. Qian's eyes opened wide, his pupils almost bulging. His throat felt like it was about to stop breathing. Mr. Dong's body was walking straight past him, suddenly approaching the bush where he was hiding and stopped for a long time. Qian was stunned. Could it be that Mr. Dong had discovered him? He asked himself in panic. But luckily, Mr. Dong's body continued to move rhythmically without stopping. He walked in the opposite direction from which he appeared like a soulless machine. Qian panicked and yawned to get through the last fatal moments. As a rule, Mr. Dong kept circling back and forth on the village path. Finally, Qian deduced that Mr. Dong had died and turned into a wandering insect in the village, just waiting for someone to be careless and take his soul. Qian texted Qiu again, asking if the suspect she mentioned had left Wuthon. If the suspect had not left, then it was most likely another ghost. But Qiu quickly texted back, she was certain that it was the culprit. Because she had now seen him with her own eyes getting into a truck and hiding in a deserted parking lot near the riverbank. Moreover, in that truck bed she could see the next victim. She had informed Deng about this. Qian breathed a sigh of relief. He was always worried about Qiu's safety. If she mistakenly followed a ghost, things would get complicated. Because a ghost was a ghost, no matter how good her martial arts were, it would be useless. As for the murderer, he was a human, so all police skills could be used to the fullest on him. After waiting a little longer, Qian had grasped Mr. Dong's movement pattern. So he quickly sneaked out of his hiding place and ran to the meeting place with the other two. When he arrived, he saw Deng and Qiu already hiding there. Qian carefully crept to their hiding place. Deng saw Qian was so late, so he asked, "Why are you late? We've been waiting for you here for half an hour." Qian sighed, wiped the sweat off his face and said, "I just met Mr. Dong." As soon as Qian finished speaking, both Deng and Qiu opened their mouths and almost cried out. But Qian quickly hushed them to keep them quiet. He said, "Be careful, if the culprit discovers it again, it will be difficult to catch him." The other two tried to suppress their fear and turned their attention back to the murderer sitting in the truck. He looked at the stars and kept looking at his watch. All the while, he ran around in the truck bed, sprinkling black coal dust and drawing strange shapes. Then he started pouring a can of gasoline on the girl. When he finished, he lit a cigarette and smoked, waiting for the time to come. Exactly 8:45, exactly 15 minutes from the time of the crime. The man started to put on a Catholic outfit. Just as Qian had guessed, this murderer could be some Catholic fanatic who worshipped Satan. There were many churches around here, so it was very possible that he hated Catholicism and so he followed Satanism for some reason. Qian could see that in the trunk of the car, he had sprinkled black coal powder around the girl's body, forming a 5-pointed star shape. That pentagram represents some symbol that the murderer thought he could use to summon Satan. Unable to wait any longer, this time Qian did not wait to shoot to alert the perpetrator, but quickly hid behind the bushes and approached the truck bed. Similarly, Qiu and Deng also turned to the sides to intercept the culprit. At exactly 8:50, the murderer started lighting the fire and prepared to drop the fuse to burn the girl to perform the pagan ritual of sacrificing evil spirits. In a flash, Qian appeared and used a beautiful martial art move to kick the fire out of the guy's hand and then rushed forward to grab the guy's neck. The murderer was scared and struggled to escape. He jumped into the truck and ran away. But he was caught by Qiu and Deng. He was held tightly and handcuffed. The three of them hurriedly pulled off the mask on the murderer's face. They immediately let out a surprised sound. They discovered that the murderer they had been searching for all this time was none other than Quan, the stubborn and docile militiaman that Mr. Dong had recruited. According to Quan's testimony, he is a Catholic priest who worships Satan. His father's group was active 10 years ago but was gradually suppressed. He is a descendant of one of those priests and continues his father's legacy, using satanic rituals to seek the unrealistic hope that after death he will be able to serve the devil faithfully. 3 months ago, he began to learn the rituals of this devil-worshipping Catholic sect. Then he began to kill girls. He said that because his village had no daughters, he had to move his target to hunt down girls in the neighboring village. Asked again why he wasn't afraid of ghosts, he said that he was afraid too, but had long known the rules of the ghosts in the village so he could still move around safely at night and commit crimes. The serial murder and arson case ended. Deng, Qiu-nu, and Qian returned to Hung Ha. Qian later made his relationship with Qiu-nu public, and the two had a happy wedding. About 3 months later, Deng was transferred to Langsun to coordinate with the police investigation there. A new project called Malua Project was established by Langsun police and continued to search for the perpetrators. The case was related to a Catholic group worshipping Satan in Bhutan, so Deng had to find a way to support. Regarding the legend of the ghost insects in Bhutan, people continue to rumor about this strange species and village without finding an answer. No one can end the haunting of the ghost insects that persist in this land. It was not until 20 years later that a monk from the Central Buddhist Church established an altar here that the haunting of the entire Bhutan was finally put to an end.